So to get things rolling, I'd like to welcome our panelists, and I'd like to thank you for coming. Today we have Chief Stacey Laforme, the Chief of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We have Dr. Daniel Scott, who is the University Research Chair and Executive Director of the Climate Change Center at the University of Waterloo. And lastly, we have Frances Edmonds, the Head of Sustainable Impact for HP Canada. So I'd like you guys to give them a round of applause.
Yeah, so how we're going to be doing this, we have 4 questions prepared for our 3 panelists. Each of our panelists will have up to 4 minutes to respond to each one. And then, depending on how much time we have left at the end, we'll be taking some audience questions from you guys, which you want to know from our great panelists up here. So Dorian, do you want to get us started with the first question?
I would love to. Our first question is, please tell us a bit about yourself. What you do and your commitment to climate action. What actions do you take in your job and in your everyday life to respond to the climate crisis?
I get to go first. Wow. The important people in the middle and ladies should go first. But so I'm Daniel Scott. I guess maybe I'm the scientist on the panel. I guess is that much my role. So at the University of Waterloo, as was said, I wear a couple hats. So I'm a professor in geography and environmental management. I run our climate change research center, and I'm also the director of our Master of Climate Change program, which is the only one of its kind in Canada, bordering on this in the U.S. as well. Columbia University has one there. So I hope to see many of your faces in the not too distant future at Waterloo. We have one of the strongest climate change programs in North America, so I hope to see more of you there. In terms of what I do at the global scale, so if you've heard of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it's the United Nations science body. Every 5-6 years they do an assessment. I've been a contributing author and expert reviewer on that in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and now 6th assessment. So when you see some of that stuff come out, the 4th assessment was the IPCC shared the Nobel Prize with Al Gore at that time. So one of the several hundred scientists involved in that process. So that's what I do at a UN level. When you come down to the local scale, we take lots of different actions. So in Waterloo, we created the Residential Energy Efficiency Project 20 years ago. That's now been to over 20,000 homes to do energy evaluations and provide advice to people in Waterloo region in terms of how they can reduce their greenhouse gases. As I said, we started our Master of Climate Change program, and the reason we did that was to create the first generation of climate change professionals, because there is that sort of profession doesn't exist, so to speak. And so we've now had eight graduating classes come through there. They're sprinkled across Canada and internationally, but a lot of them are in federal government positions. And some provincial ones as well. So they are taking action internally through different policy measures and other things. Again, hopefully that's where some of you will end up someday as well. I also sit on the board of some NGOs. So Protect Our Winters, some of you may have had some of our athletes show up in your classrooms. I helped start that, so sit on the Canadian board for that. They've been quite active, so they have their Hot Planet Cool athletes that come to your classrooms. But in the last election, we also were quite active on social media. You may have seen the Fact Back program. We started that. We did the policy or platform grading. I had to do that, so they handed that to the professor to give grades to the different parties. So a number of different things that go from high level down to the local level. In terms of my own life, just very quickly, 15 plus years ago, when I first started teaching our big climate change class, Climate Change 101, if you will, to our undergraduates, I had them do a carbon footprint exercise. So they knew in the type of life they planned to lead, what their carbon footprint would look like, what they could do to reduce that. And I did mine for my family, and the number one thing I could do was stop flying or fly less. I have been to over 40 countries of the world. Which is great, and sort of you can meet many people who are struggling with some of the things that you hear about. But at the same time, that was the biggest source of my emissions. So I've had to say no more often than I say yes. And I don't go to many of the big climate change UN conferences for exactly that reason.
You just ended abruptly there. I was like, Ani, was you? Nagani, Anishinaabe, Stacey Laforme, Mississaugas, Credit Dunjabam, Ingrid Odom, Mississauga, Anishinaabe Dowell. I just told you where I'm from, what my Anishinaabe name is, and what my clan is. I'm either a Wolf Clan or a Turtle Clan, depending on the lineage I choose to follow at the moment. My Anishinaabe name is Nagani Anishinaabe, which roughly translates to speaks for or leads people, something like that. And my job, let's see, a little bit of everything I believe is what I am. And so when it comes to the environment and climate change, as you know, my role is not so much the technical expertise or even the how do I combat climate change as an individual. I mean, you guys are probably better on a computer than I am, so you can look up David Suzuki's recommendations or any other ones that impact you individually or many of the other opportunities that exist out there with regards to organizations. But I see my role more as you see, a lot of people look to the indigenous people thinking, well, they have all these knowledge and are going to save this planet. That's not our job. Our job is not to save the planet. Our job is to help Canadian society reconnect with the world around them, because everybody had that connection at one point in time. We just sort of forgot it as we've grown away from there. So our job is to help everybody reconnect and understand this and why it's important, so that together with the various tools and gifts we have, that together we can make an impact and save this planet. Which
Well, good morning. Good morning. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity to speak with you. So my name is Frances Edmonds, and I'm Head of Sustainable Impact for HP Canada. And I consider that a privileged job, that I work in technology. I'm paid to work full-time in sustainability. And if you think about all of my competitors in Canada, none of them have a Frances working for them. So that tells you something, doesn't it? I am actually a scientist. I have a degree in environmental science, and I too sit on some boards. Education is a key component for me. You might have seen I was quoted in an article in the Star on Saturday about this. So I sit on the board of an organization called Learning for a Sustainable Future, who are here today, who will be walking you through some of the workshops. I do a lot of mentoring. I run a women's sustainability networking group to try and encourage young women to succeed in this profession, such as it is. And I do a lot of teaching, and mostly about the circular economy. Show of hands, how many people have heard of the circular economy? Great. I actually believe that this is going to be one of the many solutions that we need, but of course we need more education in this space. And the board that I sit on, LSF, just issued a climate literacy survey across the country 2 weeks ago, and it's pretty damning. So I actually do fundraising work to help LSF deliver education to your peers on the issue of climate change and sustainability. So that's one of the things I do in my personal time, but HP actually pays me to do that as well. What else do I do? After a 30-year career working in sustainability, trying to move the needle, the thing I have hit upon is that everybody, from individuals to businesses to government, need to buy with sustainability in mind. Just completed some research that looked at how our taxpayers' money is being spent, and I can tell you virtually none of it is spent with sustainability in mind. So we buy, our city councillors, our provincial and federal governments are buying like we're in the 1800s, like climate change didn't exist, and that's not okay. And if we just changed that, that would send a signal back into the marketplace. We're in a capitalist economy today. If we just changed how we buy, we would create so much impact almost immediately. To me, it's the fastest tool we have because we need to move fast in this space. And so I'd encourage each of you to think about it. Every time you spend $1, who are you spending it with? What signal are you sending back to that manufacturer? It's really important.
Those are all extremely powerful answers. I was sitting here listening like, holy moly, these guys, like, they really know what they're talking about. So thank you. It's a privilege to have you guys here. I want to move on to the next question. How has the urgency of climate change action changed in recent decades? And why haven't we taken action to change sooner?
Okay, I'll start this time. So I think the sense of urgency has changed in some of Canadians, but not in all Canadians, right? And can you hear me okay? Yeah. I would put that down to a lack of education and a lot of misinformation out there. So those of us who get it, particularly the scientists amongst us, need to be talking a lot more about this. And there's some hesitancy out there, I think, maybe not in your generation, but in a lot of generations. Sometimes I might be the only person in the room talking about this stuff. And that's pretty scary because everybody needs to be aware. They need to understand the complications and make a connection to what they do on a day-to-day basis. You know, not flying is one thing to do, and I'm an executive working in a technology industry, so I shouldn't have to fly. But sometimes people will be really pushy with me. No, we need you here in person. And I'll go, I don't need to be there in person, right? So there's a lot of lifestyle habits that need to change and change fast. I think we're starting to see the tip of the iceberg, but as I say, if we just keep buying like we're in the 1800s, we're not going to change things.
I forgot the question.
The question
Okay.
was, do you want us to repeat?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the question was, oh, thank you. How has the urgency for climate action changed in recent decades, and why haven't we taken action sooner?
Because we're lazy and stupid. I'm sorry, but we'll make any excuse in the world to let the next generation deal with it, and we've come to the point where we can't do that anymore. And my apologies to you and to your families and your children to come, because our generation is messed up so bad that this is going to be on your hands to fix. It's not fair, but it is, and the sooner you're involved, the sooner it'll happen. You know, we'll do what we can, those of us who are here to support you, but quite frankly, this is an issue that's going to carry on for generations, and it's going to be you that deal with it. So I'm really glad you're here today. I got to say one thing though, and no insults to scientists at all, but I happen to be a poet, and behind every poet is a philosopher, right? So I'll just say that a scientist spends their lifetime proving what a poet knows upon waking. So, yeah. So I don't know if I've answered the whole question, but you know, I liked your comments about be careful what you buy and how you purchase and things, because I've noticed that a lot of fast food places are not there anymore. And in the future, I think that people like your generation will just simply say, we're not buying there anymore. We don't like the way you do things. We don't like that you're not friendly to the environment. And we're going to change how we do that. And you'll affect that industry so dramatically, and it'll have to change. Anyway, that's my answer for that.
All right, I'm no poet, but I'll do what I can. So from a science perspective, the case for action on climate change has been crystal clear to us since I started in this field. So for 20 years, the evidence has been there. We've got a real problem. And to both previous speakers' points, the question is, why haven't we acted? And there's a lot of vested interests, both in industry but other parts of the world, that are part of the problem. So in some of you may have heard the term ClimateGate. So back in 2009, we had a real step back at that point. People hacked into emails, cherry-picked bits and pieces that they wanted. And that stopped or delayed the Paris Agreement. It should have been signed in 2009. It delayed us another sort of 5, 6, 7 years into the Chief's points. Many political leaders just kicked the can further down the road for another 5 years, another administration, and soon it's landing in your lap. And that's true. So From a voting perspective, it's absolutely true. I'm Gen X, so I'm squashed in the middle of baby boomers at one end and millennials and yourselves at the other. You actually have the votes to turn the tide on this. My generation did not. And so we're with you by and large, but it will take the numbers of young voters to become really active and say to the regressive conservatives in our province, what you've done isn't okay, and you're never going to get reelected if you continue to do that. So you've had progressive policies that they've stripped away. Just a quick point, you know, Ontario can't sell you gas or oil. We're not an oil-producing province. We have spare electrons. So rebate or incentives, as they'll call it, on electric or EVs, electric vehicles, is really about getting, you know, a new set of consumers for this province. We can't sell you oil, but we can sell you electrons. If we build those EVs in the province, in our auto sector, that's purely a business case. Even the regressive conservative government that we have in place now should be supportive of things like that. We had windmills being started, sited. We've gone through the hard part of where to put them. They weren't completely built. They're taking them down. How ridiculous is that? So some of those things have to stop, and it's your voice that's going to make that happen.
We'll go right into the third question now, and this is something that I would like to know. When you see someone who's a climate denier, what do you say to them? And how do we get everyone to be on board with climate action? Do we even need to get everyone on board?
Oh, I guess I'll start this one off. I'll start the easy one off. So first we would look at why are people in denial, right? Many reasons for that, as you said. Some are certainly personal interest, business interests, where they want to go in the future and how that'll impact their lifestyle. I think another time is ignorance or misleading information that is actually done on purpose to students, and that's been documented that it has occurred, that certain big companies will mislead students in classrooms to try and get them sympathetic to where they want to go. So that's also an issue with it. One of the things that I do, and I don't know how effective it is, but I try to personalize it for the individual. I try to make it something that they see and understand. One of the greatest impacts you can have on another person is to tell them what it means to their kids. Because everybody, you know, you tell me something that's going to affect me, I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of old, I don't care. But if you tell me how that's going to affect my kids and the generations to come, I'm like, shit, I better get off my ass and do something. So the way I shouldn't have swore, sorry. I apologize, I know none of you have ever sworn before. So I'm going to take 2 minutes and tell you how I try to do that. I feel like my mic's dying here. Can I trade you for a second? That's better. Oh, that's much better. So I'm going to read you a poem because I said I was a poet. And it's not a nice poem. It's nicely written, but it's not a nice poem. And it's not meant to be nice. It's meant to teach people what's going to happen if you don't do something, and you don't do something now. And it's called Mother, and it's from the perspective of the earth. And I'll read it to you. Why do you hurt me when I have nothing but love for you? I have seen you crawl from the dark into the light. I have watched you learn to walk and then to fly. I have seen you squabble and fight. I have cheered for you, and I have feared for you. I give freely of what is mine to give, yet you take more than I am able. You hurt me. More and more you ignore my pain and my cries. I am ancient, but I am not immortal. I have a time. Why do you seek to rob me of it? Through the years I have been here for you and yours, for your grandmothers and their grandmothers and their grandmothers. I would stay to see your children raise their children, but I cannot, for I am dying. I do not measure the passing of time as you do. Nevertheless, I know my time is coming, and it is soon. I love you, my children, but I fear I will fail you. And even though you have failed me first, anger is not in me, for I was created of love as were you. Therefore, the toughest part of goodbye is knowing that you cannot go on without me, that your time will end far too soon, and no one will know. This great journey, this grand adventure called humanity, will be undone as if it never existed. I will care for you as long as I'm able, yet when the rivers no longer flow, when the trees die, when the wind rages and the storms come, know that it is not my anger, it is the end of the love I can no longer give, the love you can no longer take. It is my end, and sadly, it is yours. Thank you. I'll stop there for now.
Okay, so I'll stick with that one. We'll leave the other one. So just quickly, in terms of how to deal with deniers, there's no one way, and there's very different types of deniers out there. We all might have that crazy Uncle Larry or Aunt Susie. I've stopped actually worrying about them. And the reason for it is society will move on without them. The only reason you respond to them at family dinner, Thanksgiving, Christmas, or whatever is to sort of stop the contagion, if you will, so that Aunt Bob or Uncle Bob or somebody else doesn't actually think they have a point. So usually I listen carefully. You hear their typical talking points, and then you respond with the science fact instead of science fiction. So that, the ones that I worry about, I mentioned ClimateGate before, those that sponsored that hack, as well as Exxon's funding of deniers, they've done their work well. For 20 years, like the tobacco industry, but we've been sitting on very slowly acting on this. So they've done their work well. There are, as the chief said, sometimes people, or it's science literacy, so I've gone on talk radio shows, people come with their questions, and those are legitimate questions, so you hear them out, you talk them through the science, and that can be your job too. Hopefully you're getting educated well enough already. My kids are 16 and 12, and I see bits of that, so that can be part of your job, because generations before you weren't actually educated on climate change, and many teachers actually struggle with how do you teach it when they haven't had that as a teachable either. So that's an important part of the answer as well. The politicians, those are the ones that matter, because they have the levers of policy, spending, etc. And those are the ones where you have deniers in political positions. So in the last election, we had what we called a tweet avalanche. So every time Bernier opened his mouth on things that were really offside or absolutely misinformation, working with Protect Our Winters and Sid Lee, another PR company, we responded to those with tweets of here's the real answer to that, so that misinformation couldn't stand there in the Twitter universe uncontested. And I think we had 5,000 people join that initiative, so whenever something was misinformation out there, you'd get 5,000 tweets saying here's what the real answer is. So you too can take action in the social media space come the next election. That can be part of your job as well.
So I'm going to take the business case here. Many people argue there is no business case for acting on climate change, but actually there is. And we know that renewables are on par with traditional energy today. This year, we actually published the fact that we had $900 million in new business based solely on our sustainability leadership. So if the marketplace is recognizing you for doing the right thing, which we've been doing for many, many years, and we publicize this data because it's a challenge to our competition to step up and do more. So it's quite clear you can create a business case. When I go talk to customers, they increasingly want to hear about this stuff. I'm actually paid to go and talk to customers and tell this story. There is a clear business case today for leadership and sustainability and taking action. So we've got the moral case, we've got the business case. What's left is the fact that we've got deniers, and I agree don't waste too much time on them unless they're contaminating the people you're trying to work with, in which case you do have to tackle them. But go around them. Don't waste time on them. We don't have time to waste time on people who are just stuck in the mud. Change is hard. It's about change and change management. And it's possible to do, but it takes time and effort. And you know, part of the problem is that no one person has all the answers here, right? If we're trying to make these changes, it requires everybody from every strength and skill and line of business to lean in and make the changes that are necessary. So it's about collaboration and thinking and working together. These are wicked problems. They're hard to solve. If they were easy to solve, we would have solved them already. So it's not insurmountable. It is possible to do, but it's going to take all of us with all of our strengths and skills to lean in.
So we have one more question, and then we'll take some audience questions, or do you want to? Yeah, okay. So we'll skip our last question, and we're actually going to be taking audience questions now from you, and you can say which of our panelists you'd like it to be answered by, or by all of them, and Kane's going to be going around.
Yeah, so it's as you can see, we have a great group of people who are really motivated and science-driven, and two of you guys are from like technology and science. So whenever I hear about like being environmentally friendly, I usually hear like, oh, turn off the lights, useless water, do less of something. But like I think that why can't we use technology and innovation to not have that, but rather be more friendlier to the environment by using technology rather than, not flying by like using less of something. So like, what are some, leaps you see in the industry for innovation in the green space?
So that's a good question. And I like the angle that you've taken there. And I think we do tend to be seen as, you've got to go to hair shirts and live in a cave if you're going to really be sustainable. And we know that that's not true. So we have to actually dispel that myth a little. So thank you for asking the question. If we think about 50% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions and 80% of biodiversity loss as a result of extractive industries, that's mining, digging for oil, and farming. So let's take the farming aside and let's look at the mining and digging for oil. The reason we're doing this is because we live in a linear economy today. And frankly, we've sold Canadians a bill of goods by telling them that for 30 years that all they had to do was recycle. The reason we have the plastics issue today is because we take all these plastics and there's no value for them when we put them in the blue box. We dutifully wash them and put them in there and expect something good to happen with them without closing that loop, without looking for products that contain recycled plastics. So you can have this lifestyle of, a good lifestyle if you start to think in a circular fashion. And I think that's the piece that we're missing. We're not giving transparency to the linear systems that we have, and we're not incenting the circular modes that we do. We do not need to make any more plastic. We have enough plastic if we just created market conditions through procurement again that would actually entail that plastic to come back and be used and used and used again, which is entirely technically possible. So I'll let my other scientist answer that.
The point, that is the sort of point. We need to provide, and that's what we try to do, is provide a vision of what that future looks like. What does low carbon, net zero carbon economy look like? And the quality of life, if you show and demonstrate people that it can be better than what it is today, people are on board for moving there. Already, more people are employed in Canada in renewable energy than in the oil patch. Most people don't know that, and we keep being bombarded. Without the oil patch, Canadian economy falls apart. No, it doesn't. If you reorient it in the right way. So a big task for Canadians so that you can travel with the types of vehicles that you have now is if you can electrify the grid, clean the grid. Quebec's already is because it's mostly hydro. Ours is nuclear, a lot of hydro, so it's not. But getting rid of coal was a big thing. You electrify that fleet and all those emissions from at least your car, so you can pick spots where you can remove that. Quality of life and the things that you like to do now don't actually change that much. And then you focus on some of those other areas that have been talked about that have real negative impacts. and you have to get rid of those things. But there's a lot of simple things we can do, from refrigerant management to cleaning our grid, that won't change a thing. It will only provide better air, better water, and many of the other things that we actually want. So part of that is demonstrating what that vision of clean tech and other things look like, the jobs that come with it, the skill sets that you'll need to be employed in there, and people are much more amenable to moving that than this sort of doom and gloom. Now, you won't be able to do this, you shouldn't do that. That is where we have to get to.
So the natural world and the world that surrounds us is all science, right? It's basically what it is. It's understanding the relations things and how they impact one another. So a lot of my people, and this is maybe not what you're asking, but a lot of the indigenous people are going back to some of their historical ways and their roots and things of that nature. So they're relearning how to survive in a world where you can't just go to the supermarket and buy what you need anymore. They're relearning the skills of surviving on the land again, and we're certainly understanding that that's not first and foremost where everybody wants to go. Because I love the gifts and the toys and everything else that exists in this world as well as anybody else. But we are preparing in case we need to be prepared, so that we can make a lifestyle on the land. And it's not just us who are doing it. There are plans and ideas around cities, and I've seen it even in Toronto. They're growing gardens, they're growing foods to bring to the markets and stuff. So they're almost becoming, like you said, circular, because they're using the environment to support the internal survival of the cities and stuff of that nature. And I know a number of colleges and a university that are focusing on similar types of practices, or trying to combine food structures with the environment and with animal life. It's very interesting in that science perspective. But, you know, once upon a time, everybody in this room, well, your ancestors' blood memory, knew how to start a fire without a match. So it's just a good skill to have, is all I'm saying.
Thank you so much for that question and those amazing responses. I think we have space for a couple more questions. I think we'll come back to you guys in a sec. We're just going to take a question from the side.
Thank you very much for being here. My question is on a specific policy, which is the carbon tax, or the price on pollution. I would like to know, how much do you think the impact of that will be on the Canadian country, like the carbon emission in Canada? And in a First Nation perspective, I would like to ask, do you see it appropriate for a government institution? I want all of you to answer, but specifically in a First Nation perspective, do you think that to be appropriate as a government institution, as a separated power, as a organization, to enforce something on people to change their decision making and kind of intervene in our personal lives to make better decision, or any other decision, or maybe different decisions? Do you see it appropriate as a government to intervene in our decision making? And I would like you, the scientists, to answer whether you think the impact will be positive or not for Canada. Thank you.
So let me start. As the business person on the panel, HP is completely supportive of carbon pricing. The economists tell us it's the cheapest way to get the signals into the marketplace. We live in a capitalist economy. Let's leverage the capitalist economy to make the changes we want. And that's a pricing signal. So it doesn't matter to us whether it's cap and trade or carbon taxation. There needs to be a price on carbon. And we've been very public and actually lobbied on this, put ads in the Globe and Mail. And I think most smart businesses want certainty. This whole lurching from one system to no system to maybe half a system creates disruption, and business likes certainty. And what we need is a price on carbon, and a reasonable price on carbon. It's like a high price, so that it actually changes behavior. So that's what we need, and that's what business, for the most part, is behind. And there's a false narrative out there that business doesn't support this. I would say the majority of businesses support it because they want certainty so that they can make the investments in the right place. And investment planning for business is a long-term strategy, right? We need stable long-term planning to be able to be successful in what we do. So business absolutely supports it. It is the most effective and cost-effective tool to get us to where we need to be. And all businesses today are looking at climate change. You're starting to see signals from the marketplace, from the capital markets, telling us that we need to disclose climate risks. You know, we're shipping our stuff from Southeast Asia. The climate risks of doing that are huge. And the worse the climate gets, the more disrupted our supply chain becomes. We can't meet our customers' needs. It seriously impacts our business. It is a key thing we need to be looking at. And so supporting climate policies and taxing of carbon is one of the most important things to do.
Chief told me I should go next, and then he'll tackle the second part of your question. So fully support what was just said on the carbon tax. Nobel Prize winning economists will tell you it is the cleanest, simplest thing to do, not cap and trade. There's a whole bunch of bureaucracy that comes with that. Put a carbon tax on the stuff. Set it, as was said, high enough that it changes people's decisions. The world doesn't end. BC has had a carbon tax for almost a year, or almost a decade. Life goes on. Other jurisdictions in the world, same thing. People, you know, it starts to make a difference. It has to be priced high enough to really bend the curve. And the other thing you can do is you make it revenue neutral. So instead of taxing your employment, we want you all to be employed. We tax the things like we do with sin taxes, with cigarettes and other sorts of things that have negative impacts on society, and you transfer that money to people. So if you have a low carbon footprint, as many Ontario, you know, we get the stickers on the gas pumps, it doesn't also tell you, oh, and by the way, you'll get a rebate. Most of you will actually get money back. That's the part that's missing on those stickers. So that is absolutely the cleanest thing to do. And as was said, this flip-flopping from one government policy to the next, we've seen it in our province, we've seen it in Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand. That is the worst thing, not just for business, but for policy. You get this sort of spits and furts, things that get started, somebody comes along and takes it apart and calls it policy. The only place that's really been stable are the Europeans and to some extent the Chinese, and there's where you're seeing the real action. They're sellers of this technology. We're going to end up being buyers because we've sat out of the game for too long.
So carbon tax is, in my mind, you know, certainly better than cap and trade. But I say it like this. Carbon tax, it needs to be broad. It can't be isolated to a province. It can't be isolated to a country even. It has to be accepted globally. Otherwise, it's like, well, how can I say this? Okay, it's like you can only pee in this side of the pool, right? If nobody's buying in, then the fact is that it's still going to be polluted. It's still going to continue on. And I think that's part of the issue with, and the rationale why people think they can push it aside is, well, you're not going to do it, and he's not doing it, and it's impacting my bottom line. Why should we be doing it? So I think that's a problem. Certainly First Nations have some issue with the carbon tax and the way it's structured. And if you look at the land bases and who has natural resources and that type of thing, and no consideration of their validity in the carbon tax process, that's an issue for them. But I wanted to talk about, and I know there's so many smart and scientifically minded people here, but I want to talk about the fact that, yes, we're yelling at the government, do something, move us to a better place. But as individuals, we can do that, but we have to understand what we're doing. Let me give you an example. Two young people came up on me in the street in Toronto the other day. They were from an organization, and they wanted to know if there's two things in the world you couldn't live without, what are they? I'm like, oh, that's a tough question at 8 a.m, but okay, because there could be many things you could think of, right? And you might even think of some science stuff. But so my answer was, okay, what about the earth, the waters, and the environment? I say they're all connected, so I'm taking that as one. And I say, but it's not just about the planet. Yes, we need to move ahead on the planet. Yes, we have to take care of the earth and the waters. But when you start understanding that, okay, I'll tell you what I said to somebody before is, When it comes to climate change or impacts on the earth, it's not about finding a solution to a problem. Mother Earth isn't a problem that needs to be solved. She's a soul that needs to be saved. So when you start thinking about the concept of your interaction with the world around you and the concept of respect for that interaction, that just naturally carries over into your life and into the way you react to other people and other issues. And we become better people. We become more respectful. We become more loving. We become more acceptable. And it's just a natural transition from starting to understand your connection to the earth to starting to understand the people around you. And people don't realize that. So for me, it's a fundamental principle. Of course, the other thing I told those two people was you have to have identity. If you don't know who you are in this world, you're subject to manipulation, you're subject to self-doubt, and things of that nature. I have a poem about that, but I won't read it to you. Thanks.
Now we're going to go on this side of the room, and we'll take a couple more questions. We still have about 15 minutes, and we'll go here.
Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to ask more on a personal kind of what you can do as an individual to change mindsets. We talked a little bit about lack of education earlier, and that really struck a chord with me because I personally believe that my generation or the younger generation they're one of the most skeptical people that I know. So it's very hard to kind of meet someone and not change their mind when they're open to new suggestions. But for example, I come from a family of immigrants. When I try to, when I try to re-educate them, they're often a little more stagnant and a little more harder to persuade. So I wanted to ask how, you as an individual kind of try to deal with them and support them with facts, obviously, but I really want to make small changes, and I feel like everyone should do the most they can. So I want to ask you guys how you would handle a situation where somebody really just doesn't give you the time of day when you're trying to tell them, hey, let's buy this at the store instead of this, and they're like, well, this one's cheaper, and I don't know, just the little things I feel like would make a big difference. So that's my question.
So you've really hit on the nub of it. Thank you. That's a very good question, because when you're down to those individual day-to-day decisions, most of us are busy and blah, 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 right? So if you're actually putting your rubber on the road here and you're trying to have this conversation, let's say with a family member who's a first-generation immigrant, what is it that's going to sway them? And if you're looking at pricing, you can argue that pricing doesn't take the full cost into the account, right? So what is it that will move them? Is it the fact that this could be causing child labor or forced labor in the supply chain somewhere? And how do you reassure yourself that that's not happening? Most people today in Canada, I'll give you an example. So we just produced the world's first laptop with ocean-bound plastic in it. That got the most shares on LinkedIn that I've ever had of anything that we do. And we do a whole ton more stuff than that. That's just, one tiny little thing. So trying to figure out what it is that moves these people. Sometimes it's child labor, sometimes it's pesticides and pollution, sometimes it's the Amazon burning. If you buy this ream of paper and it's not FSC, you do not know whether that's coming from an illegally logged forest or not. So tying it to that purchase decision of what the impacts are, and it could be not buying an Energy Star rated product, right? It's going to cost you more to run that. Not buying a product that has an end-of-life recycling program. You have those choices. So you have to, most people have no education about how everything is fundamentally interconnected and where things go when they're finished with them. Fast fashion is a great example of that. So I think you have to do a little bit of educating as you go along, and which means you yourself have to be educated too. So great that you're here, and I'll hand it on to the other panelists now.
So I liked your answer earlier, which was ignore those ones and move on because the world will go on without them. But if there's enough of them, then we got a problem. So I don't think that logic alone can move people off when they're living their life. You know, if this is saving me $5, you know, that's $5 I can use for something else. So I don't think logic alone can do it. It has to be a fundamental principle, something that they care about really deeply, in a way to show them that that connection they have with that thing is going to be impacted by what's going on here, and this is how you can sort of save, how you can impact that. Also, one of the larger areas I think is we need to do strategic planning around it. How do you do this? And with that, you look at your allies, your supporters, you look at barriers, blockades, you look at how, and you take into consideration those who are deniers or those who don't want to be bothered, and you come up with a plan about how you move forward today, tomorrow, and 10, 20 years from now, and because it's going to be going on that long. But I think to change a person who's involved in living their moment, well, the secret, I guess, would be, now I got to tell a story. Okay? So, I don't have to, but I'm older now, and it's expected, at least in my culture. So, I was at I was invited to a conference from Rotarians. Rotarians are good people who do a lot of good work, mostly business people. They do great things. But Rotarians are very process-driven people. They like every dotted I and crossed T. And so they invited me to do an opening for 30,000 Rotarians that are coming to Toronto. Of course, I said yes, and they wanted, 6 months in advance. They wanted my speech, my bio, and things, and that's not how I function. I wrote my notes for this one back there. And so so they invited me. Anyway, eventually I sent them my opening, which included 2 poems, what I thought were very, very supportive of what they do. And then a week later, they sent me back an email that said, "We're sorry, Chief, but according to our word counter, your speech is going to be longer than the allotted time." So I said, okay, and I took a poem out and sent it back to them. And when I got there to rehearse, because you got to rehearse for the Rotarians, when I got there to rehearse, I noticed that they had taken the other poem out when I read it, and I go, okay, I don't think I can do this. I said, I think you're going to have to get somebody else to do your opening. No offense to you or to your organization, but for me, in this moment, I don't think I can do this, because you talk about respecting Indigenous ways, you're talking about working with Indigenous people, and right now I kind of feel like you're doing the opposite of that. So no disrespect to you, but you're going to have to find somebody else. So they went out and they came back and said, no, you have the time you need, Chief, go ahead and do it. So I talked to him and I said, okay, and here's my point to that long-winded spiel. I talked to him and I said, you should always take a moment and step back and make sure that what you're doing in the moment is in keeping with your vision of who you are and who you want to be. Because we all get so caught up in our lives that we don't do that. We can be doing things that we think are great, but they don't reflect our values and what we believe in. And I think that people have to be reminded of that sometimes. And with family even, like, it would be like, but is that who we are? Is that what we believe in? Shouldn't we just think about this for a moment and step back? And I think that's an important lesson to learn. So, thanks.
Just quickly to add to that, be skeptical. That's great. That's what that's what we train you to be. Challenge the status quo. Anything that I say, what your parents say, whoever, challenge it. The status quo isn't working, at least on the climate file, so you have to challenge it. So that's the first message. 2, in addition to what's been said, lead by example. As both speakers, the chief said, focus on what they care about. Well, they care about you, right? Whether it's your parents, your aunt and uncle, your family, they care about you. And if you're out there leading by example and doing things different, at some point they're going to notice and go, the shame will begin to sort of accumulate on top of them. part of that can be, next election, you be an advocate. They may have their election sign. If you feel differently, get a different colored one and stick it on your lawn too. That's your right as a person, and show that, no, I think differently on this. This issue is this important to us, and you lead by example. So those are some of the things. And then the other thing is, advocate to change the system. And the reason for that is, again, Uncle Larry may leave the lights on all the time. Right? But if the grid is green and low carbon, it's just going to cost Uncle Larry some money. It's not going to ruin the climate. So part of it is also changing that broader system so that their decisions that you may not support don't have the same impact that they do now.
Unfortunately, I don't think we have enough time for any more questions, but there will be a section later on in the event where we can kind of mingle and all that. And if you have any more questions for the panelists, and if they still have a bit of time to share with us, then maybe at the later point you can have a chat with them for that. But right off, we'd just like to thank you so much, and thanks for everyone for those amazing questions. And we'd like to give a very, very strong thank you to the panelists for all their amazing insight from the 3 different perspectives and really addressing our concerns. Thank you.